All right. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was filling in for Pastor Fry, and I'm actually, again, tonight as well. But Lord willing, he'll be back. We looked at Peter, the Apostle Peter, as a preacher, and we saw primarily from the book of Acts, basically how he preached the gospel. And we examined a few of his sermons to see what were the elements of his preaching. What I'd like to do tonight, not look at Peter the preacher, I want to look at Peter the pastor, because he was a pastor as well. And the main text, what will spring off of a lot, is 1 Peter 5, verses 1 to 4. Would somebody read that?
The elders who are among you I exhort. I am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away.
Thank you. So the pastorate has never really been easy, and in my opinion, it would seem to be getting tougher as we go further and further into iniquity. We're dealing with worldly philosophies, we're dealing with false religions, we're dealing with psychiatry, we're dealing with an anti-God society, we're dealing in a day, it's the age of reason and relativism. You know what I mean by relativism? Right? It's whatever's true for you is true for you, but it's not true for me. We have the social justice, movement that's come out the last few years, wokeness, quote unquote, and basically, we live in a day where people don't have time, very busy in life in general, especially as, we're in, metropolitan areas. All right. Well, Peter is especially valuable to us as an example of a pastor for two reasons. The first is he was commissioned to be a pastor from Jesus himself. Somebody read John 21, verses 15 to 17.
So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. All
right. So feed my sheep is pastoral, right? Care for my people. All right. So that's the first reason he's valuable to us as an example of a pastor. The second is he's left us 2 letters to help pastors and elders feed the sheep. Right? He's told to by Jesus feed the sheep, and now he leaves us 2 letters and helping us to how to do that. And his first letter, which I went over for about over a year or so, probably about a year or so now, the congregation is threatened externally by people, by evil, by persecution. Therefore, there were many social pressures coming upon young believers or new believers. And his second letter, the congregation is threatened internally by heresy and false doctrine. And of course, that letter is geared towards helping them to unravel that and to deal with that. Now, in the context of 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 to 4, in the NAS, the New American Standard, it says, therefore, in verse 1 of chapter 5. Therefore, and what therefore does is connects this passage with what came before it in 1 Peter 4, 12 to 19. And let me ask Claudia if you would read that. 1 Peter 4, I didn't give it to you. 1 Peter 4, verses 12 to 19.
Well,
12 to 19.
Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insomuch as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Go on.
Yeah, up to 19.
If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and God rests upon you. Let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good.
All right, so, and then very next word is therefore, chapter 5, verse 1. All right, so it connects it. And 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 to 19 is dealing with suffering, i.e. a fiery trial. And it's dealing with God's temporal judgment on his own people, and that he will come also and purify his people. So therefore, in light of these three things, he says, I exhort the elders. Now there are two possible things that Peter is saying to the elders in this passage. One, it's time for judgment, so I exhort the elders. Right? 1 Peter 4:17, for the time has come for judgment to begin in the house of God. In the Old Testament, God's judgment begins with his own temple and his priests. Did I give you guys Ezekiel 9:6? Somebody want to read that?
Utterly slay old and young men, maidens and little children and women, but do not come near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuaries. So they began with the elders who were before the temple.
All right, cleaning house, in-house. Malachi 3:3, someone?
He will sit as a refiner and the purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to the Lord an offering in righteousness.
Okay, thank you. All right, in other words, refinement is coming, and it begins with the elders. Secondly, the second thing Peter could be saying is when God's people are being severely tested, all right, the caring leadership of the elders is most needful and most helpful at that time. All right, now how might that be true today? How might it be true today that the care of the elders, the leadership of the elders would be very needful in the times we live in?
Well, because there's a lot of temptation to compromise, give up your Christian convictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, ostracized by family and co-workers, under great temptations, financial hardship in the day we live, et cetera, right? In Peter's day, many of these new converts were severely persecuted. Women may have been beaten by husbands and brothers for becoming, leaving heathenism and becoming a Christian. Free people would be looking down on slaves, right? Remember, about half of the Roman Empire were basically, in slavery. They would lose, privileges that they would have. There would be no promotion in jobs or whatever. There would be excommunication from the village. One of the big problems in those days, if you were a tradesman, which many people were in some way, shape, or form, nobody would do business with you if you became a Christian. You couldn't trade with anybody. You couldn't sell your goods to anybody, and they wouldn't sell you theirs. All right, so you were kind of ousted, financially because you couldn't do business. All right, so now notice that Peter gives this advice to elders, and he gives it to them in a public document sent to the church. This wasn't a secret letter sealed and just for the elders. It was to the church. It was to Christians at large. And this tells us that the function of an elder is public knowledge. First of all, it's public knowledge. Also, that elders are accountable to the flock to fulfill their position, because he's going to tell us what an elder should be and what his attitude should be, right? And he's telling it to the church. This is what these guys should look like. These are what these guys should look like. And this should cause people to pray for their elders, and for the elders to pray to live up to the position that they've been called to do. All right. Now, what I'd like to do today is look at those verses in chapter 5 of 1 Peter, those first 4 verses, using 4 points: the pastor's identity, the pastor's task, the pastor's attitude, and finally the pastor's reward. And so I'll read verse 1 for his identity. The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Peter was an elder. He was an apostle, absolutely. He was in the inner group of apostles. Whenever you see, 2 or 3 apostles named and doing something, Peter's always there. It's always Peter, James, and John, usually. But Peter's always there. He's in the inner group. He was the Lord's friend. He was a leader of the early church. He was the first among apostles. He was like a leader among leaders, if you will. Yet how does he see himself here? As a fellow elder. He saw himself as a fellow elder. And just as John MacArthur may be the head of Grace to You Ministries, Grace Church, but he's also a fellow elder at Grace Community Church. So with every other elder, he's an elder too. And the same thing goes for every popular, well-known, preacher, pastor right? He's one among many. He may be extremely and extraordinarily gifted to preach and teach, but he's an elder, just like those other men are elders. And so he's not above them, he's one of them. And so Peter stresses what identifies him with his readers, and not distinguishes him from them. He doesn't say to the elders, I, Peter, an apostle, say to you, do these things. I'm an elder too. Right? He does not promote himself or his apostolic position. How many men, even in the church that in the day we live, will remind you of their position? Right? They remind you of their schooling. Sometimes if you have a question, and I've heard this from people, they'll say, I went to the pastor, I had a question, and he said, listen, I went to seminary, meaning you can't question me because you didn't go. So they remind you of their experience, their schooling, that they have a higher position than you. They enjoy titles. Some people like to be called doctor, like to be called reverend, bishop, apostle, founding pastor, big kahuna, whatever you want to call it. They want to be known as something. Right? There's a sense of hierarchy, but this should not be so in the church. The greater a man becomes because of his gifting, the less he should think of himself. Right? The less he should think of himself. Jesus said in Matthew 23:11, but he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. So in the way the world goes, those who are the greatest, they lord it over everybody else below them, like they're king and everybody else is not. In Christianity, those who go up must go down. You want to go up, you got to go low. It's humility is what is the mark of a leader. Humility. All right? So Peter says, I exhort you, and I exhort myself as well. In essence, what he's saying is the task of every elder is as great and significant as that of the apostle himself. What you're doing is just as important as what I'm doing. In fact, I'm doing what you're doing. I've just been called to a much different ministry in his case. All right, so Peter was an elder. Secondly, he was a witness of the suffering of Christ, he said. In Luke 23:49, we read, but all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. That's, of course, talking about the cross. Peter stood at a distance from the cross, right? He wasn't right up to it because we know he kind of fell away. And he saw Jesus' suffering. He did not get close like John and the women, but he did see the Lord dying on the cross. Now, I'd like to give you two definitions of, and he says he's a witness. Witness. A witness is someone who sees something. All right, so I saw Dan last week preaching at Queen Center Mall. I saw it with my own eyes. Secondly, a witness is someone who enables others to see. So one is, I see something, and the second one is someone who enables other people to see something. All right, so you would have like a war memorial is a witness for us of a battle that maybe happened years ago and people who fought in that battle. Or a history teacher, Dylan McKeon, he's a witness to what happened in the past during a certain time and in a certain place. Well, Peter was a witness in both senses. He saw and he's revealing things as well, right? He actually saw it, but he's also revealing more. So he not only saw Christ's sufferings, but he also demonstrated them. Remember, Jesus said to him in John 21 that in his old age, that Peter would be taken by those he didn't want to be taken by, and he would be crucified. And church history tells us that he was crucified, but he didn't feel worthy to be crucified as his Lord was crucified. So church history says, how did they crucify him? Upside down. I don't even know how that would work, but that's what church history says. And we are called to look at Christ's sufferings as well and to suffer for him as well. Why? So that others will see Christ in us and we'll grow closer towards him. And this is a sobering verse. Somebody read Philippians, if I gave it to you, Philippians 1:29.
For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake.
And we've talked about this many times, this verse, right? So the word granted means graced. So it's been gifted to you not only to believe. So salvation is a gift, right? But part of that gifting is also suffering. And you don't hear this usually in sermons, and you won't hear it like on, from many preachers. But just like you get the gift of salvation, you get the gift of suffering for Christ. And they're both gifts. All right, Acts 5:41 says, so they departed from the presence of the council, that's the apostles, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. They rejoiced that they could suffer shame for his name. Somebody read Romans 8:17 and then 8:36. Oh, did I give it to you?
Romans 8:17?
Yeah, did I give it to you?
Yeah. And as children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together.
The if is the qualifier. If indeed we suffer with him. And then 8:36.
As it is written, for your sake we are killed all day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter.
That's suffering. All right, so Peter was an elder. Peter was a witness of the suffering of Christ. And also, thirdly, in this first point, Peter is a partaker of the glory to be revealed. All right, now understand, Peter understood that the path of glory was through suffering, but he didn't always understand that. He understands it in 1 Peter 5, but he didn't understand it before the cross. Somebody read Matthew 16:21-23.
From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men.
He didn't understand that Jesus had to suffer. It was God's will. He suffered for our sins. Nor did he understand that those who follow Jesus would suffer as Jesus did as well. He couldn't understand that at that point. But what he's saying now is he does understand it now. He's saying if you share in the suffering, you will also share in the glory. If you share in the suffering, you will share in the glory. So suffering is a condition of glory, but it is also an assurance of it as well. Because who in their right mind would suffer what the apostles did and disciples of that day and Christians throughout the last 2,000 years? If they didn't have the Spirit of God in them, assuring them that they were His. You know what I mean? And even as we get, laughed at and ridiculed and, left out or whatever it is from things that go on even in our own, life and maybe in our own families even, it reassures us that we're His, that we're not ashamed to step up and speak up because we love Him and we know what He's done for us. So we're not ashamed, and when we get hit down, we get beat down for it, and we do, it ought to encourage us in our own souls, that we're His, right? That we're standing up for Him because we're His. So Peter knew that what he was looking at, particularly, was a cruel death of martyrdom. He knew that. Now let me give you just a few quotes on suffering. I thought they were good. One is by John Piper. He said, "We do not choose suffering simply because we're told to, but because the one who tells us to describes it as the path to everlasting joy." A man named Wendell Phillips said this: "Christianity is a battle, not a dream. It's a battle, not a dream." John Stott said, "If the first mark of a true and living church is love, the second is suffering. The one is naturally consequent on the other. A willingness to suffer proves the genuineness of love." And a man named Vance Havner said this: "Where are the marks of the cross in your life? Are there any points of identification with your Lord? Alas, too many Christians wear medals but carry no scars." Too many Christians wear medals, i.e., cross and Christ heads or whatever, but carry no scars. And sadly, many Christians in the West, they run from suffering. They want comforts. They want blessings for Christianity, not trials and not troubles. And that's why, the health and wealth and prosperity and seeker-sensitive, guys, and just guys that don't want to build a crowd, they're not going to deal with this part, and they're really not going to deal with it. They're going to bury this, because this is not, this is not something that your unsaved person is signing up for. You know what I mean? They're not signing up for it. Even the Christian, when someone gets saved, they may not know right away, but they will know soon enough. Pretty much. I mean, let me just ask, like, did you have any conflict with anyone you knew, family or friends, once you got saved because of your Christianity? Was there any conflict? Mike, how was it?
As a result, because no longer living after the things that they are.
Right.
So you bring the gospel to them. It's contrary to their worldview. Can get pretty tense.
All right. And Raymond?
Yeah, I had a cousin tell me that I make her sick, and she don't want to hear from me anymore. And I haven't spoken to her in years now.
Okay. Yeah. And we all have Emily?
I repeatedly hear, no one thinks this way anymore. The times have changed. That's just your mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, you're archaic. Yeah. And we've all been through that, usually from the get-go. Once you get saved, and all of a sudden co-workers and family members who aren't saved, they're like, something is like, gone way out of whack with you, and they don't understand it, or they usually don't like it, and so that causes a lot of friction right there. All right. Well, young believers in the faith need to know that their faith is absolutely contrary to the thinking and the philosophies and the ways of the world that they live in. And there's going to be some, they can't live what they believe and speak up for what they believe and not hit some conflict. They're just going to happen. Well, many are fearful to share their faith for fear of rejection. They don't want to be humiliated. In the West, it is unlikely that we will be physically persecuted, although I gotta believe that's probably closer on the horizon than it's been in the last 50 years. But for us, it'll be other ways. It'll be other ways. Many will not churches will not practice church discipline because people will leave the church and people don't like it. And so really there's this aversion to any idea of suffering in any way. All right, so you see his identity. Secondly, the pastor's task. That'll be the beginning of verse 2. He says to him, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers. And I want you to look at three things about his task here. The first one is they're to shepherd the flock. How do they do that? As overseers. It literally reads in the Greek, shepherd the sheep flock. And all their work should be crafted to the people with whom God has given them. Everything they do should be with a view to help them, to grow them, to protect them, right? Like Paul, they should be willing to spend and be spent for the sake of souls. So an overseer means someone who cares for them, right, who has oversight. So there's leadership in that. Also, secondly, besides they're to shepherd the flock is God's flock. Shepherd the flock of God. It's God's flock. They should never forget whose flock they're shepherding. It's God's flock. So Pastor Phil and I, we would be under shepherds to the great shepherd. I mean, I need to be shepherded, and I'm shepherded by the shepherd, the great shepherd, or the good shepherd. But my task is to help his people, right? And Phil's is as well. But ultimately, you're his people, right? It's God's flock. It's not Pete and Nicotra's flock. It's God's flock. I'm just tending his sheep, right? I'm tending his sheep. They're his sheep, and what he wants, it's his flock. Now, why is it easy to forget for pastors that they're God's sheep? Why is it easy to forget that these are God's sheep, and not my particular sheep, we'll say?
I think you get caught up, in the, I guess, in the limelight, so to speak. I'm thinking of a particular pastor, from the South, that everything was all about him, and the church was growing, but he was nationally known, you know, and then like his wife even saw, you know, that it was not about God anymore, it was about him and him being in the limelight. He got so used to it, you know, so it's just getting caught up in the externals and forgetting the reason why God called him to that ministry.
Okay, yeah.
Can I be in a point, pride also?
Certainly pride. Look what I did, you know.
Also, in addition to that, I would say in the same way that, you know, like I'm thinking about my own task that God has given me, I can get so lost in that and forget the purpose and who commissioned me. So it's just like, you know, that becomes your identity.
Very good. There and there, or there and there.
I was going to say, a lot of times when a pastor doesn't read his word like he's supposed to, he forgets that God doesn't talk to you audibly, he talks to you through his word. So you have to be entrenched in it to really know what God is saying to you of what he wants. And then you fall on human pride and you say, well, I feel I got to do this or I got to do that. And you become more powerful than what you are.
Okay, good. Anthony?
To that point, it reminds me of like Deuteronomy 17. Like I know like an elder is not a king, but when a king of Israel was to reign over his people, he was said that not to accumulate, you know, like many wives or many kind of like treasures, but he was supposed to like write himself a copy of the word, have that approved by the priest, and then once everything is good, he's supposed to like live on a day and night, right? And then another reason why I think too is because he might love receiving like the attention and the applause of man. That it just gets to him.
Right. All good. And now from another angle, from looking at the sheep angle, sometimes the sheep don't always look very godly, right? Sometimes the sheep aren't very Christ-like. And so sometimes the sheep are really weak, sometimes annoying, they struggle, they take up a lot of your time and energy. Sometimes they say and do foolish things. Sometimes they let you down. And so, you know, if you're looking for, you know, stellar, perfect sheep, you know, well, no one is that. And so that's a possibility as well. Because the expectation is you know, that they're going to live a Christwood life, and sometimes they don't. And so that, you know, he could become disillusioned even with the sheep itself. But I like what you all said. It was good. Well, because they are God's flock, things like size and giftedness doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying about that? Size and giftedness, it doesn't matter. In America, the first thing one pastor will ask another pastor when they meet each other, guess what it is? What's the first question he'll ask? People ask me all the time. You know, it's like how big is your church? And I heard this guy Ted Donnelly say, it would be like saying to someone like, how big is your wife? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. You know, but like that's the measure of the man. Oh, I have like 50,000 people in my church. Well, he's a great pastor. Well, he got like 50. Oh, what a schlump. You know, it's like nothing going on there, right? But size and gifting does not matter. But in America, of course, it does matter. As if size has anything to do with the task that God has given you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the measure of the man how many are there. It's the faithfulness of the man to do the task, whether it's few or many. Right? That's the call. And too many view size as a mark of success. But the mark of success, if you want to call it such a thing, is the holiness and the growing and the godliness of the people, right? Someone used the illustration like you could have like 1 million people, and it's like 1 inch worth of water like for 8 miles, but it never gets deep. It's only like an inch worth of water to get your toes in, as opposed to getting in and going down, right? And we want to see us grow so that we become deeper and deeper and deeper into the things of God and more mature in the faith. Yes, Daniel.
It brings to mind John 6, where at the beginning, feeding of the 5,000, he's preaching to like 20,000, mostly eager people, right? And at the end, he's got 12.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And that's the great shepherd.
Yeah. Well, notice one more thing about this. Peter says, where is it? Pastor the flock, which is among you. Which is among you. This is saying that the elders are among the flock. Right? There's a closeness here. Right? The reason Peter knows his flock is because he's familiar with his flock. He's familiar with them. It's hard to care for someone that you don't really know well. Right? So if the pastor has no connection with the people, right, it'd be like trying to shepherd from like 40 miles away, and just like, move them left, move them right. He's got to be there. He's in the midst of the sheep. He knows when they're dirty. He knows when they're naughty or whatever their hairs get. Is that Candy saying something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so someone like who has a big church, who's a Reformed theologist, who is walking in the Word of Christ, how would he personally know everybody?
Well, so in a case where, let's say, like it's like 1,000 people, like John MacArthur's church, well, he's got 30 elders. You know what I mean? And so those guys make it their business to know the flock. So that's the task of an elder. So yes, one man can't know 1,000 people intimately, but he's, Daniel.
Would you say that phrase, the flock of God, which is among you, speaks against like hierarchical church organizations like the Roman Catholic Church or the Presbyterian Church?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're dealing with the flock of God among you. No one else is overseeing them, but those, the one who is among them, or those who are among them. Yeah, I would say that as well. Although some would disagree with that, Dan. So the pastor knows his flock. He's familiar with them. He understands who they are. And as an elder, you are also an overseer. Remember we said elder, overseer, bishop, pastor. Those 4 terms are all the same guy. Robert? Oh. They're all the same guy. It's not like, there's the bishop, and then there's the pastor, then there's the overseer. There's not a hierarchy here. He's just talking about the same guy, but different aspects or functions of his ministry. All right, so they're all the same guy. A bishop has no more authority, is not in any way different from a pastor. Although we live in a day, there's bishops, and then there's everybody else. It's a term of hierarchy. Not so in the Bible. Right? You read 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, a bishop and an elder and a pastor and an overseer, they're all the same guy. That's all the same person. All right, so I'm a bishop. Phil's a bishop. But I wouldn't use that term today because I know it has it sends the wrong signal. It makes it sound like I'm more important than someone who's not a bishop. But every pastor is a bishop. All right. So the pastor, he looks for, the shepherd looks for, how to keep the sheep healthy. Are they eating good? Comb out the hair, the fleece, make sure they're getting their proper exercise, make sure they go by water and all that kind of stuff, right? The shepherd takes care. He's amidst them. How is he going to know if they're sick or need help unless he's like hands-on, so to speak, right? He's got to be hands-on. Well, how can you oversee God's people if you don't spend time with them? And I find it odd that some pastors of churches, like you have to make like a 4-month appointment to go like talk to them for 5 minutes. I'm serious. I've heard this from people. You got to make and maybe you get to talk to them and maybe you don't. All right. Well, Peter tells us that elders and their people are among each other. So they're involved in each other's lives. Again, it's hard to discern someone's spiritual life from a distance. How do I know what's going on in someone's life if I don't even know them? Right? How can I be shepherding people I don't know? All right. Third, notice that they are entrusted to you. Verse 3. Not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. So God sovereignly gave each sheep to his pastor. There is not one believer in the church that is there by chance or mistake. I can't believe we got so-and-so here. No, everybody who's in the body at that local church is in the body at that local church. It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake, right? God has chosen the pastor to care for each one that he has given him. And if he's given him a lot, he's got a lot to care for. If he's given him a little, he's got a little to care for. Therefore, pastors need to love each one of their sheep. Each one is extremely valuable to God and therefore must be valuable to the pastor also. All right, that means you need to love and care for the ones that are not so easy to love and care for. Because not everybody is Jose Ocasio. You know what I'm saying? It's just easy to get along with, and whatever you need, he's there. Some are tough, some are a little rough, some have hard edges. It's just how we are in general. We're just different, right? Some of us need a lot of care. Some people need very little, right? It's like children. Some of them you have to spend a lot of time with because they're very needy. Some not so much. You can let them go on their own a little bit. We're different, all right? And so that's just the reality of that. So some are not so easy to love, yet for others it is easy. Now, because a pastor's flock is handpicked by God, they should not envy another pastor's flock. And I have sadly fallen into this trap at times where I've seen other churches with maybe very mature believers who have like a load of musicians who are serving, using all kinds of gifts in the church. And I think to myself, well, why can't we have one of those, flute players or, one of those violinists or, how about a keyboardist or, whatever. Oh, I'm looking at one. She's having a baby. All right. And the thing is, we can't envy or say, well, why don't I have this, but they have that. God gives you who he gives you. Love them and care for them and help them to grow. That's the task, however they are. Right? And it's an awesome responsibility to care for one of Christ's sheep. It's an awesome responsibility, not to be taken lightly. Right? Because he loves them so much that he gave his life for them. And so who is any pastor to look down on them or to sort of bypass them and not care for them? All right, so we see the pastor's identity. We see the pastor's task. Thirdly, the pastor's attitude. That's in verses 2 and 3. He said, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. So Peter's concern is the attitude in which the pastors approach their duties. What's the attitude? The attitude's got to be right. And in this context, he warns of 3 dangers for pastors, particularly vulnerable to things like sloth or laziness, power for gain, or lust for power. All right? Those are watch-outs. Now, not by compulsion, he says, but willingly. No man should be in the pastorate that is either forced into it or just doing it because no one else is there to do it. Just do it because, no one else is there to do it. Or you got to twist his arm to do it. You should never, I don't know if it's Titus 1 or 1 Timothy 3 where he says, if a man desires the office of an elder, he desires a good work. He should get to desire it. It's got to be something that he wants to do, not like, I got to be twisted. My arm's got to be twisted to do this.
Timothy, I think it is.
Timothy? Yeah. So he's got to want it. He's got to want to do it. This job shouldn't be a burden. Shouldn't be like, here we go. Another Sunday. Got to hear it again. Another burden. What a burden. All right, it shouldn't be a burden for his sheep and the lost, but all right, he should be burdened for the sheep. He should be burdened for the lost, but the job shouldn't be a burden to him at all. He should have a burden for the souls of people, right? John said in 3 John, he goes, my greatest desire, where I get most joy is to know that my children are walking in the truth. Right? And he's not talking about physical children, he's talking about, Christians. They're walking in the truth, gave him great joy. Right? Many people in the world hate their jobs, or they tolerate their jobs. Right? Some will go through the motions just to get it done, but they have an attitude. They have an attitude of like, I don't really want to do it. It certainly shouldn't be the attitude of a pastor, like I just got to do this, just got to get it done, got to crank out a Bible study, got to crank out a sermon, I got to do a baptism. Shouldn't be that way. The world, like I said, they complain about what they do. Like Jose was saying, there's bitterness, there's complaining about the people they work for. They find no joy in their jobs, and I've worked with plenty of them. Right? They find no joy in their jobs. Let me say that there isn't any job that a Christian can't find joy in. We should have joy in any job that we have, because we do it as unto the Lord, right? So yeah, we're getting a paycheck, and that's God giving us our daily bread. But you know what? We work for the Lord first and foremost, right? And yes, we have bosses and overseers and whatever else is above us. But ultimately, we work for God. And because we work for God, that ought to make us good workers, and that ought to give us joy, even in hard scenarios, right? We ought to be joyful even in jobs that we find mundane, or, there's a lot of drama, or what do you call it, Jose? Everybody's talking about everybody, all right? Many people work jobs that they dislike just because they want to get paid every week. And people get into this trap. They get a job and they're making okay money, whatever it is, but they hate the job and they can't leave the job because they can't make that kind of money doing anything else. And so they're stuck, right? And they're joyless, right? But this should not be the case for pastors, right? The money isn't what should motivate a pastor. If a guy's looking for the package to become a pastor, well, what do you got for the package? How many weeks do I get off? What kind of pay this? What kind of, benefits there, benefits there, benefits there? I'm not saying don't pay the guy, pay the guy. He should be able to live. But if that's what he's thinking about, if his motive is the money, he's in it for the wrong reason. He really is in it for the wrong reason, all right? There are many other jobs that he could probably make more money at than being a pastor. He should just do one of those. All right, Peter put the word willingly there for a reason. They should willingly do this, willingly. Willingly means that you will gladly do the ministry God has given you. It means that you cheerfully do whatever is needed to care for the sheep. It means you happily do the boring or mundane things to you. And I know that there are things that we do in life in general that are just really not that interesting to us or exciting, but we have to do them because we have to do them. Many of our jobs, there are aspects of our jobs that are very mundane, right? Would you not say that? Everybody have any mundane things in your jobs? Right, we do. Right? There are things sometimes that I find hard in just even being a pastor. Like, I'm not crazy about paperwork. I don't like going on hospital visits. Hospital visits at 1 a.m, although I will do them. Although recently they've kicked me out of hospitals because I didn't take the shot, and other little things that aren't my top 10 things to do. But I say I just got to do them, and I do them hopefully with joy. But let us remember that our Lord Jesus Christ willingly left heaven and became a man, and he willingly suffered the shame and the agony of the crucifixion. And when we measure all things to the cross of the Lord, nothing in this life measures up. Nothing does. All right. And if our Lord could willingly do that for me as even a pastor, then what can I as a pastor not be willingly do for his sheep? If he did it for me, why can't, I should be glad to want to serve and bless his sheep. All right. So not by compulsion, but willingly. Secondly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. And sadly, there are many who enter ministry for dishonest gain. Right? Paul will tell us in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 that there are many peddlers of the word of God. Right? Many peddlers. Not some, not even a few. He says many. They see the pulpit as a place for profit. Right? They have gifting. They're good speakers. They're good orators. They're articulate. They have charisma. And they're natural born leaders, and people like that. People are given to that. They'll flock to that. But nothing dishonors a ministry more than a love for money. Nothing. It kills it. Once people think you're out for the money, you've spiritually lost them. And I know some of you guys have been in places where you might have sensed that from where you were. When a pastor is living lavishly or wealthily, it's a stumbling block usually for the flock. If the flock lives, if the people in the church live right around here, where should the pastor, how should he be living? Like here? He should live like here too, right? You shouldn't make him live like this, and then you're muzzling the ox, but he should live like you live, right? That's a problem with a lot of missionaries. They're from this country to other countries, like third world countries, is they got to live, they need more than the people of that third world country. And so they live like this, and the people they're trying to reach are like this, right? And then that's a disconnect for some of these people because you're living like this. So this is what the prosperity gospel is, right? Where you have men twisting scriptures, telling ignorant people that God wants them to be rich. And of course, they're the example of this because they look how rich I am, look how good I've done. I'm the example of how God wants to bless you. So just keep giving me your stuff. Totally contrary to the scriptures. Totally contrary. Jesus was a poor man. Foxes have holes. The birds of the air have nests. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In other words, If you're following me because you think it's going to, profit you, you're following for the wrong reason. There's no profit here, no monetary profit. Right? Paul sent a delegation to collect an offering for the poor saints in Jerusalem from the Corinthians. He himself said, unless you want me to, I'm not even going to touch the money. He wouldn't even take money for preaching in Corinth or Thessaloniki. He said, no, I'm going to build tents. I don't want to be a stumbling block to anybody, to you to think that I'm in this for the money. He's not. So he preached for free. One of the qualifications for an elder is not to be greedy for money, 1 Timothy 3:3. Right? And this has always been a problem. Somebody read Micah 3:11.
Her heads judge for a bribe, her priests teach for pay, and her prophets divine for money. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? No harm can come upon us.
See that? Everybody's out for a buck there. All of the spiritual leaders are out for a buck. Somebody read Jeremiah 6:13.
Because from the least of them, even to the greatest of them, everyone is given to covetousness. And from the prophet even to the priest, everyone deals falsely.
Well, they're given to covetousness. They're going to tell you what you want to hear so they could keep the dough rolling in. And these are the prophets and the priests who are, again, spiritual leaders. Right? In Titus 1:11, Paul is talking about the elders who are among you to have to combat those who subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not for the sake of dishonest gain. There's always been charlatans in the church. It's happened from the very beginning of the church. Why ought we not to think that it would be 100 times worse today, right? People see a way of making a living and a good living, and prospering off of faith of other people or for the goodness of other people. All right, so a pastor's income should not be what drives him. I'm not going there unless they give me 6 figures and I get 6 weeks and I get this bonus and that bonus and this bonus. It should never be that way, right? He should do it for nothing. If he were independently wealthy, he should do it for nothing. What a privilege, right? He should be content with what God gives him now and look forward to the riches he will receive when the Lord returns. And so he should not do anything for dishonest gain, but he says he should do it eagerly. And eagerly means to be of a ready mind. They should be motivated to labor not for the desire for financial gain, but by love. Love should be the motivation. Christ's love for them, which in turn causes them to love his people and all people, right? They should be moved by compassion for the flock. Right? So the first danger pastors must watch out for is laziness. They must watch out for power of gain, and of course, lust for power. And that's the third one. Nor as being lords over us. And there he says, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And being lords over them means to exercise dominion or unreasonable power. Now, how can a pastor exercise lordship or unreasonable power over the sheep? Maybe you've had experiences or know people who've had experiences in other churches. How can a pastor exercise lordship or unreasonable power over the sheep?
Like maybe manipulation or making them feel guilty.
That's one way. Yeah.
You can make unscriptural demands on their behavior.
Say that again?
You can make unscriptural demands on their behavior, kind of like the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Rules,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
Or others because they say, oh, I'm the pastor, I'm the one that had the calling, so I do what.
Yeah, you can't question me.
Exactly.
Right? Absolutely. How else? Well, certainly in the whole money of area, that's a big one. They can beat you to death on that. Like they can send that plate around like 52 times if it's not heavy enough. Raymond?
I've seen where pastor said, this is my church, I started it, I do what I want. Nobody can oust me.
Well, there you go. All right, absolutely.
Getting a majority to turn against you?
Yeah, well, it's happened for a lot of you guys. I don't know if anybody in this room, but some people have left a church for maybe they for doctrinal reasons. And when they try to approach, the pastor and say, listen, I'm really struggling. I don't believe in this. I'm coming to like a more of a reformed understanding, like we know. And And sometimes the pastor turns the rest of the church against them and saying, that person is a divisive. Don't talk to them. They're in sin, and that kind of thing. And so they basically discredit you in front of everybody else, right? And that's how they shut you down. All right. Well, being lords over them again means to exercise dominion or unreasonable power. It's like being an authoritarian, a heavy-handed leader. I said it, and that's it. Right? I'm laying down the gauntlet. It's having everything to be your way. They can dominate through their personality. Some people are very aggressive. They will not take no for an answer, nor can you ever question them on anything. Right? You can't ask anything. They impose, as one of you guys said, man-made regulations on them. We don't do that in this church. Yeah, girls don't wear pants in this church. We can do something like that. By getting involved in areas they don't belong in. And I know of elders from a church that won't allow their people to talk to other people. I don't want you hanging around with that guy. Well, he's my friend. He shouldn't be your friend anymore. Or the elders must choose, what the tablecloth color is going to be at refreshments. No, we don't use the checker. We use the solid. That's crazy. Or any of those kind of things. So you have to be careful not to be heavy-handed. Listen, the elder's job is not to run your life. Right? I have no business telling you what kind of car to buy unless you're candy and want to know. All right? And you need help. Then maybe I'll help you if I know something. But it's not my job. My job is to help you to grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. And if you have practical things going on in your life and you need counsel, I'll counsel you. And I'll say to you a lot of times, this is my opinion. But I can't tell you what job to take. I can give you biblical principles, and then you choose, and you determine. Right? So it's not my job to do any of those things. I can't tell you who to hang around with, but I give you biblical principles about, who to be yoked up with and not yoked up with. But again, my job is to help you grow spiritually, to help you to be able to do the work of the ministry, as Ephesians 4 says. All right, lastly and quickly, the pastor's reward is verse 4. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. And Peter is obviously a very heavenly minded man. He's looking forward to the day when the chief shepherd, Jesus, returns. And you can't read 2 Peter and not hear it there. He desired to hear, as all Christians should desire, well done, good and faithful servant. He was looking for the promised reward, which he calls here a crown of glory. It's also called a crown of righteousness and a crown of life. So what is the crown of glory? Well, here's what it is. Here's what it is. Reigning with Christ forevermore. That's the crown of glory, reigning with Christ forevermore. Now notice that this crown does not fade away, he says. This is an allusion to the crown that winners in Olympic Games were given in those days. They were made of different kinds of flowers and branches, but they would quickly, over time, sort of fade away and die out. And the world strives for earthly crowns. They do. But pastors should look forward to an eternal crown, an eternal one. And because it's an eternal crown, it should make their labor joyful, right? Because at the end of the day, every pastor who truly loves Christ and knows him, regardless of whether it was easy or hard, big or small, whatever the case may be, he's looking forward to the crown. As every Christian is looking forward to the crown. We all are, right? John Calvin said this, unless pastors keep this in view, it can never come about that they will continue in the course of their calling in earnest. In other words, if you're just caught up in the here and now and it's all you're ever seeing, it's going to get rough. But we need to look forward. We need to look what's coming. As even every Christian in our lives. If we get bogged down and have tunnel vision of what's going on right now, all we see is doom and gloom, and struggle and hardship, then we're going to tank. But if we're looking forward to the reward, to the inheritance that's waiting us, it gives us the strength, if you will, to press on, right? To persevere. All right. And he says, and he reminds them that of the crown to come will stimulate them to fulfill the task that God has given them. That's what he wants to do, is to stimulate them. And when the chief shepherd appears and judges all men, then those faithful under shepherds will have what is infinitely better than temporal gain, which is glory with Christ. And so we see his identity, the pastor's task, his attitude, and his reward. And he says the reward last to encourage them to press on, to keep going. It may not be an easy work at times. It may be very hard work. It may be a lonely work. but it's a good work and it's a God ordained work, and that's how God grows and blesses His people through that work. All right, any questions? All right, then we'll Paul, Joe, pray for us, and then Dan will play our last song.